The air was thick with the scent of pine and lake water as Clara Hensley, president of the Lake Wisteria Homeowners Association, marched up the dirt path to Amos Reed's cabin. Her heels sank slightly into the soft earth, but her resolve was ironclad. Behind her, 3 other board members, Tom Grayson, Linda May, and young Ethan Carver, followed like a posse, their faces a mix of determination and unease. The sun was dipping low, painting the Tennessee hills in hues of amber and crimson, but the beauty of the evening was lost on Clara. She clutched an eviction notice, its edges crisp and official, like a weapon drawn for battle. Amos stood on his porch, leaning against the railing, a man carved from the same rugged oak as the cabin itself. At 62, his weathered hands told stories of decades working the land, fishing the lake, and building a life on this very lot. His gray eyes, sharp as flint, tracked Clara's approach. He'd known this day was coming. The HOA had been circling like vultures ever since they'd incorporated 2 years ago, claiming authority over every blade of grass and plank of wood around Lake Wisteria. But this was personal. Amos Reed. Clara's voice cut through the evening chirp of crickets. She stopped at the base of the porch steps, brandishing the notice. You've got 10 days to vacate this property. You're in violation of HOA regulations, unapproved structures, failure to pay dues, and that eyesore of a boat shed cluttering the shoreline. Amos didn't flinch. His lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. That's so, Clara. You sure you got the right cabin? Her eyes narrowed. Don't play dumb with me. This association has the authority to enforce compliance, and your refusal to cooperate ends now. Pack up, or we'll have the sheriff out here. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. Tom, a retired mechanic with a soft spot for fishing, avoided Amos's gaze. Linda, who ran the local diner, clutched her purse like a lifeline. Ethan, barely 25 and new to the board, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But Clara was relentless, her voice rising as she waved the notice. You don't own this land, Amos. You're squatting. The county records show this lot under community jurisdiction. Amos chuckled, low and gravelly, the sound sending a shiver through Ethan. Community jurisdiction. Huh. That's a fancy way of saying you think you can bully me off my own property. Clara's face reddened. Your property. You've got no deed. No proof. You're a holdout, Amos, clinging to some old-timer fantasy. This lake belongs to all of us now. Amos straightened, his presence suddenly towering despite his lean frame. Clara, you might want to check those records again. 'Cause I don't just own this cabin. I own the lot. I own that dock you're so proud of. Hell, I own the road you walked in on. The words landed like a thunderclap. Clara froze, the eviction notice trembling in her hand. Tom's jaw dropped, and Linda let out a small gasp. Ethan's eyes darted between Amos and Clara, as if waiting for the punchline. But Amos's gaze was steady, unyielding, like the lake itself. You're lying, Clara snapped, but her voice wavered. You can't own all that. The HOA controls the infrastructure. We've got the paperwork. Amos tilted his head, his smile sharpening. Paperwork don't mean much when it's built on lies. You want to play this game, Clara? Let's play. The standoff stretched into the evening, the tension coiling tighter with every passing second. Clara's confidence, so unshakable moments ago, began to crack. Amos wasn't just some stubborn old man. There was something in his voice, a certainty that made her stomach twist. Had she missed something? Had the HOA? As the group retreated down the path, Clara's heels kicking up dust, Amos called after them. You come back with the sheriff. Clara, you better bring a lawyer too. The lake was quiet again, save for the soft lapping of waves against the dock. His dock. Amos turned back to his cabin, the weight of years pressing against his chest. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about legacy, about truth, about a life carved out of sweat and sacrifice. And he'd be damned if he let Clara Hensley, or anyone else, take it from him. Inside, he pulled an old tin box from under the floorboards, its hinges creaking as he opened it. Inside were deeds, yellowed and worn, but legal as the day they were signed. His grandfather had bought this land in 1920, every acre from the lake's edge to the winding road that led to town. The HOA thought they could rewrite history with their bylaws and dues. But Amos had proof. And he had a plan. The next morning, Lake Wisteria buzzed with whispers. At Linda's diner, locals huddled over coffee, murmuring about the showdown. Amos owns the road. One farmer asked, incredulous. How's that even possible? Another replied. Clara, meanwhile, was on the phone with the county clerk, her voice sharp as she demanded records. But doubt gnawed at her. What if Amos was telling the truth? By noon, Clara had rallied the board for an emergency meeting at the community center, a squat brick building overlooking the lake. The room was packed not just with board members, but with neighbors, fishermen, and families who'd lived around Wisteria for generations. Amos's claim had spread like wildfire, and people wanted answers. Clara stood at the podium, her usual poise fraying at the edges. This is nonsense, she declared, slamming a stack of papers on the table. Amos Reed is fabricating ownership to dodge his responsibilities. The HOA has clear authority over shared assets: the dock, the road, the shoreline. He's manipulating you all. But the crowd wasn't convinced. Old man Tucker, who'd known Amos's family since the 50s, stood up, his voice raspy but firm. Clara, my daddy helped Amos's granddaddy survey that land. If Amos says he owns it, I'd bet my last dollar he's got the papers to prove it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Clara's face tightened, but she pressed on. We'll settle this legally. The county will confirm our rights. Until then, Amos Reed is not to step foot on that dock or road. The room erupted in protests. That's our dock, shouted a fisherman. My kids play there, cried a mother. Clara's control was slipping, and she knew it. She adjourned the meeting, her hands shaking as she gathered her papers. Outside, the lake gleamed under the midday sun, serene and indifferent to the chaos brewing on its shores. Amos, meanwhile, wasn't sitting idle. He'd spent the morning on the phone with his cousin, a lawyer in Nashville named Sarah. She'd laughed when he told her the story. They tried to evict you from your own land. Oh, Amos, this is going to be fun. Sarah promised to dig into the county records and prepare a case. But Amos knew this wasn't just about legalities. It was about power, about who got to decide what belonged to whom in a place as old and stubborn as Wisteria. By evening, the battle lines were drawn. Clara had called the sheriff, demanding Amos be barred from the dock. Amos, in turn, had posted signs along the road his road declaring it private property. The signs were simple, hand-painted, but they carried the same bold claim as the one by his cabin. This land is mine. As night fell, the lake was still, but the air hummed with anticipation. This was no longer just about a cabin or a dock. It was about a community divided, about truth buried under years of assumptions, and about one man's refusal to bow. Amos sat on his porch, the tin box at his side, and watched the stars reflect on the water. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The morning sun broke over Lake Wisteria, casting a golden sheen across the water and illuminating the signs Amos had planted along the road. Each one was a declaration, a challenge. This land is mine. The words, painted in bold yellow with black outlines, seemed to pulse with defiance. By breakfast, the town was alive with talk. At Linda's diner, The clatter of plates and the hum of gossip mingled as locals debated Amos's claim. Some believed Himmeltimers who remembered his family's deep roots in the land. Others, swayed by Clara's polished authority, thought he was bluffing, a desperate man clinging to a fading past. Clara Hensley wasn't one to back down. She'd spent the night poring over HOA documents, her kitchen table buried under maps, bylaws, and county records. The HOA had been formed to protect Lake Wisteria's value, to turn the scattered cabins and docks into a cohesive, marketable community. But Amos's lot was a problem, a holdout that refused to bend to their rules. Clara's calls to the county clerk had yielded nothing concrete yet, just vague promises of further review. She needed to act fast to maintain control. At the community center, Clara convened another meeting, this time with a lawyer from Knoxville, a slick man named Roger Tate. He wore a suit that screamed city money, out of place among the flannel shirts and work boots of Wisteria's residents. "This is a simple matter of jurisdiction," Roger said, his voice smooth as the lake's surface. "The HOA has legal authority over shared assets. Mr. Reed's claims are unsubstantiated without proof." But proof was exactly what Amos had. That afternoon, his cousin Sarah arrived from Nashville, her pickup truck kicking up dust as she pulled up to the cabin. Sarah was a force sharp-tongued, quick-witted, and fiercely loyal to family. She carried a briefcase stuffed with documents, including the deeds from Amos's tin box. "They're in for a surprise," she said, grinning as she spread the papers across Amos's kitchen table. The deeds were clear. Amos's grandfather had purchased the lot, the dock, and the access road in 1920. A later survey from 1965 confirmed the boundaries, unchanged despite decades of development around the lake. Sarah's plan was simple but bold. Present the deeds at the next HOA meeting, demand a public apology, and, if necessary, file a lawsuit to dissolve the HOA's claim over Amos's property. But Amos wasn't content to wait. He'd spent years watching the HOA encroach, finding neighbors for overgrown lawns, dictating paint colors, claiming the dock as community property despite his family building it. This was his chance to push back. By mid-afternoon, word of Sarah's arrival had spread, and a small crowd gathered near the dock. Clara, flanked by Roger and the sheriff, a tired-looking man named Bill Dawson, confronted Amos as he hammered another sign into the ground. "This is private property," Amos said calmly, pointing to the sign. "Y'all are trespassing." Clara scoffed. "You're delusional, Amos. This dock belongs to the HOA. You can't just claim it with a few signs." Sheriff Dawson, caught in the middle, rubbed his neck. "Amos, I don't want to escalate this. Show me some proof, and we can sort it out." Amos nodded to Sarah, who stepped forward, holding the deeds like a knight wielding a sword. "Sheriff, these documents prove Amos owns this lot, this dock, and the road. The HOA's claim is based on a faulty survey from 2018 that ignored existing deeds. You might want to ask Ms. Hensley why she didn't bother checking the records before threatening my cousin." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others whispering in shock. Clara's face paled, but she held her ground. "Those deeds are outdated. The county reclassified this area when the HOA formed. You can't just wave old papers and expect to win." Sarah's eyes glinted. "Outdated. These are legal, binding documents. Clara, you're the one who's going to need to explain why you tried to evict a man from his own land." The confrontation drew more onlookers, fishermen, families, even kids on bikes. The air crackled with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. Sheriff Dawson, sensing the crowd's mood, suggested everyone cool off and meet at the community center tomorrow with all documents in hand. "Let's do this by the book," he said, his voice weary but firm. That night, Amos and Sarah strategized. The deeds were airtight, but Clara's influence ran deep. She'd rallied newer residents, those who'd bought into the HOA's vision of a modern Lake Wisteria, complete with manicured lawns and gated entrances. Amos, with his weathered cabin and old-school ways, was a symbol of resistance, a reminder of a time before bylaws and dues. But resistance came at a cost. Sarah warned him, Clara's not just fighting for control. She's fighting for her reputation. This could get ugly. Amos nodded, staring out at the lake. Let it. I ain't leaving. The next day, the community center was packed to the rafters. Clara stood at the front, Roger at her side, presenting a polished case, the HOA's survey, their bylaws, their vision for a better wisteria. But Sarah was ready. She walked to the podium, deeds in hand, and laid out Amos's claim with surgical precision. This land has been in the Reed family for over a century, she said, holding up the 1920 deed. The dock, built by Amos's father in 1950. The road, paved with Reed family money in 1972. The HOA has no claim here. The room erupted some cheering, others shouting in protest. Clara's composure cracked as she leaned into Roger, whispering frantically. Old man Tucker stood again, his voice cutting through the noise. Clara, you told us the HOA owned everything. You lied to us. The accusation hung heavy. Clara's eyes darted to the crowd, searching for allies, but even her supporters wavered. The truth was unraveling, and with it, her authority. Amos sat quietly in the back, his gray eyes steady, letting Sarah's words do the fighting. But he knew this was only the beginning. Clara wouldn't go down without a fight, and his lake was about to become a battleground. The community center meeting left Lake Wisteria divided. By noon, the town was split into camps: those who backed Amos, rooted in the land's history, and those who clung to Clara's vision of order and progress. The lake, once a place of shared fishing trips and summer barbecues, now felt like a line drawn in the sand. Amos's signs, with their bold "This land is mine," stood like sentinels along the road, a constant reminder of the fight brewing. Clara wasn't done. She regrouped with Roger Tate at her lakeside home, a modern cabin with floor-to-ceiling windows that screamed new money. Over coffee, they plotted their next move. He's got old deeds, Roger admitted, flipping through copies Sarah had provided. But we can argue adverse possession. The HOA's been maintaining that dock and road for years. That gives us a claim. Clara nodded, her jaw tight. Amos is turning this into a circus. We need to show the community he's the problem, not us. She'd already started working the phones, rallying her supporters, mostly newer residents who'd moved to Wisteria for its potential as a gated retreat. They saw Amos as a relic, his cabin an eyesore in their polished vision of the future. Meanwhile, Amos and Sarah were building their own case. Sarah had uncovered more. The HOA's 2018 survey, the one Clara leaned on, was riddled with errors. It had conveniently ignored Amos's deeds, assuming his land had been absorbed into community property when the lake was subdivided. Worse, Clara had known about the discrepancy but pushed forward, banking on Amos's silence. She thought you'd roll over, Sarah said, shaking her head. Big mistake. Amos wasn't just fighting for his land. He was fighting for his father's dock, where he'd learned to fish as a boy, and his grandfather's road, built to connect their family to town. Every plank, every gravel stone, was a piece of his story. Giving it up meant erasing them. So, he got to work. He called old friends, farmers, mechanics, fishermen who'd known his family for decades. By evening, a small army had gathered at his cabin, offering support. You're not alone, Amos, said Tucker, clapping him on the shoulder. We're with you. The next day, the confrontation came to a head, Clara, Roger, and a handful of HOA loyalists showed up at the dock with a work crew, ready to reclaim it. They brought tools to dismantle Amos's signs and a new plaque declaring the dock property of Lake Wisteria HOA. But Amos was waiting. He stood at the dock's edge, Sarah at his side, with a dozen locals behind the men and women who'd fished there for years, whose kids had jumped off that dock into the cool lake water. "Step aside, Amos," Clara said, her voice sharp. "This is HOA property. You're obstructing community access." Amos crossed his arms. "You're standing on my dock. Clara, you want to tear it down? You'll have to go through me." The crowd behind Amos murmured in agreement, their presence a wall of defiance. Sarah held up the deeds, her voice carrying over the water. "These documents prove Amos's ownership. You have no legal right to be here. Leave, or we'll file for trespassing." Roger stepped forward, his suit looking absurdly out of place. "We'll see you in court. MS. Read. The HOA has maintained this dock for years. That's adverse possession. You can't just maintained." Tucker interrupted, his voice booming. "Amos fixed this dock last summer. Replaced half the boards himself. You ever set foot here to help, Clara?" The crowd laughed, some jeering. Clara's face flushed, but she held her ground. This isn't about one man's ego. It's about community standards. "Community?" Amos snapped, his voice low but cutting. "This lake was a community before you showed up with your fines and your rules. You don't get to steal what my family built." The standoff grew heated, voices rising, fingers pointing. Sheriff Dawson arrived, his patrol car kicking up dust. He stepped between the groups, hands raised. "Enough. Nobody's tearing anything down today. Clara, Amos, you both got claims. Take it to court. Let a judge sort it out." Reluctantly, both sides backed off. Clara's crew left, their plaque abandoned on the dock. Amos's supporters lingered, offering handshakes and words of encouragement. But the victory was temporary. Clara was already planning her next move, and Amos knew it. She'd fight dirty spreading rumors, twisting facts, turning neighbors against him. That night, Amos sat on his porch, the lake dark and still before him. Sarah joined him, handing him a beer. "They're scared," she said. "Clara knows she's on shaky ground. That's why she's pushing so hard." Amos nodded, his eyes on the water. "This ain't just about me, Sarah. If they can do this to me, they can do it to anyone. Somebody's got to stand up." Sarah smiled. "And that somebody's you." The next morning, Clara escalated. She posted notices around town, claiming Amos was endangering community safety by blocking access to the dock and road. She even hinted at environmental violations, accusing him of polluting the lake with his boat shed. The lies stung, but they worked. Some residents, especially the newer ones, started to waver, whispering about Amos's selfishness. At the diner, Linda overheard heated arguments, neighbors turning on neighbors. Amos didn't back down. He and Sarah organized a counteroffensive, inviting locals to a barbecue at his cabin. The event was a masterstroke: grilled fish, cold drinks, and stories of Wisteria's past. Old-timers shared memories of Amos's family, of the dock's construction, of the road that had saved farmers during floods. Kids ran along the shore, their laughter a reminder of what was at stake. By nightfall, Amos had won back hearts, his quiet strength a contrast to Clara's bluster. But Clara had one last card to play. She'd found a loophole in 1990s county ordinance that might allow the HOA to seize unmaintained land for public use. It was a long shot, but she was desperate. She scheduled a public hearing at the county courthouse, banking on Amos's absence to push it through. What she didn't know was that Sarah had already found the ordinance and a way to turn it against her. The county courthouse in nearby Jasper was a modest brick building, its steps worn smooth by decades of farmers, merchants, and families seeking justice. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and coffee, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as the public hearing began. Clara Hensley stood at the front, her voice steady as she presented her case to the county board. Roger Tate flanked her, his briefcase stuffed with documents meant to bury Amos Reed. The room was packed with Styria residents, curious onlookers, and a few reporters from the local paper, sensing a story that could ripple beyond the lake. Clara's argument was polished, her words dripping with concern for community welfare. She cited the 1990s ordinance, claiming Amos's lot, dock, and road were unmaintained and thus eligible for HOA seizure under public use clauses. She painted Amos as a recluse, hoarding land that rightfully belonged to the collective. "This isn't about one man," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "It's about ensuring Lake Wisteria remains a place for everyone." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others skeptical. Clara's supporters, mostly newer residents with manicured cabins, clapped politely. But the old-timers, the ones who'd known Amos's family, sat stone-faced. They'd seen this before, outsiders trying to rewrite the rules of their land. Amos and Sarah sat in the back, unassuming but prepared. Sarah had spent days dissecting the ordinance, finding its weaknesses. It required proof of neglect, which Amos's meticulous care of his property, new boards on the dock, gravel on the road, directly contradicted. More importantly, she'd uncovered a bombshell. The HOA's formation had never been fully ratified by the county. A clerical error in 2018 meant their authority was legally questionable. When it was Amos's turn to speak, he stood slowly, his work boots heavy on the creaky floor. He didn't have Clara's polish or Roger's legal jargon. He spoke plainly, his voice rough but resonant. "This land's been in my family since 1920. My granddaddy bought it. My daddy built the dock, and I've kept it up my whole life. Clara says I'm hoarding it, but I've let every one of you fish off that dock, drive on that road. Ain't never asked for a dime. Now she wants to take it, 'cause it don't fit her fancy plans." He paused, his gray eyes locking on Clara. "You want to talk community? Community ain't about bylaws and dues. It's about trust. And you broke that." Sarah stepped up, laying out the deeds and the HOA's flawed survey. Then she dropped her bombshell. "The HOA's claim to authority is invalid," she said, holding up a county letter confirming the error. "They've been operating without proper ratification. Every fine, every rule, every eviction notice, including the one against Amos, is legally void." The room exploded. Clara's face drained of color as Roger scrambled to whisper in her ear. The county board chair, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret Cole, banged her gavel for order. "Ms. Hensley, is this true?" she asked, her tone sharp. Clara stammered. "There must be some mistake. Our records. Your records are wrong." Sarah cut in, unrelenting. "And you knew it. You pushed this eviction knowing Amos's deeds were valid. You gambled on him not fighting back." The crowd's mood shifted. Whispers turned to shouts, some calling for Clara's resignation. Old man Tucker stood, his voice shaking with anger. "You tried to steal from one of us. Clara, how many others you planning to push out?" Margaret called for a recess, her face grim. The hearing would resume in a week, giving both sides time to verify claims. But the damage was done. Clara's credibility was crumbling, and the HOA's grip on Wisteria was slipping. Outside, the lake sparkled under the midday sun, indifferent to the chaos. Amos and Sarah were mobbed by supporters, fishermen offering handshakes, mothers thanking Amos for standing up. But Clara wasn't finished. Back at her cabin, She and Roger hatched a desperate plan. If they couldn't win legally, they'd win through pressure. They began a smear campaign, spreading rumors that Amos was planning to gate off the road, charge for dock access, even sell the land to developers. The lies spread fast, fanned by Clara's allies on social media and at the diner. By evening, the mood in Wisteria had soured. Some residents, swayed by the rumors, turned cold toward Amos. A brick was thrown through his cabin window, shattering the quiet of the night. Amos swept up the glass, his face unreadable. Sarah, furious, wanted to call the sheriff, but Amos shook his head. "They're scared," he said. "Scared people do stupid things." The next day, Clara upped the ante. She organized a protest at the dock, rallying her supporters with signs reading, "Save our lake," and "Stop Amos Reed." The crowd, mostly newer residents, chanted, their voices carrying across the water. Amos watched from his porch, his heart heavy. This wasn't the Wisteria he knew, where neighbors shared fish and stories, not anger and lies. Sarah, however, saw an opportunity. She suggested a town hall, a chance for Amos to set the record straight. They booked the community center for the next evening, spreading the word through Tucker and other old-timers. Clara caught wind and tried to block it, claiming the center was for HOA-approved events only. But Margaret Cole, the county board chair, overruled her, citing the HOA's questionable status. The town hall was standing room only. Amos took the stage, his presence quiet but commanding. He didn't shout or accuse. He told stories of his grandfather's dreams for the land, of his father teaching him to repair the dock, of neighbors gathering there for decades. "This ain't about me," he said. "It's about what we lose when we let folks like Clara decide who belongs." Sarah followed, presenting the deeds and the HOA's errors in stark detail. She ended with a call to action. "If you want Wisteria to stay a community, not a corporation, stand with Amos." The room erupted in applause, even from some of Clara's former supporters. The tide was turning, but Clara was still out there, plotting her next move. And Amos knew the fight was far from over. The town hall had shifted the momentum, but Clara Hensley was a fighter. She retreated to her lakeside cabin, her mind racing. The HOA's authority was unraveling, her reputation in tatters, but she wasn't ready to surrender. She and Roger Tate spent hours crafting a new strategy. If they couldn't seize Amos's land outright, they'd bury him in legal fees and public pressure. They filed a countersuit, claiming Amos's signs and obstruction of the dock violated community bylaws. It was a weak case, but it bought time and kept the pressure on. Meanwhile, Amos and Sarah prepared for the final county hearing. Sarah had rallied more allies, local historians, surveyors, even a retired judge who'd known Amos's father. They confirmed the deed's validity and exposed the HOA's overreach. But Clara's smear campaign was taking its toll. Rumors swirled that Amos planned to sell the land to a developer, turning Wisteria into a luxury resort. At Linda's diner, conversations grew heated, with some residents accusing Amos of betraying the lake's spirit. Amos felt the weight of it. He'd never wanted this fight, but he couldn't back down. Late at night, he walked to the dock, and sat on its edge, the water lapping softly against the wood. Memories flooded back, his father teaching him to cast a line, his mother laughing as they picnicked on these boards. This wasn't just land. It was his roots, his home. He'd fight for it, no matter the cost. The next morning, Clara escalated her campaign. She hired a PR firm from Knoxville, flooding Wisteria with flyers and social media posts accusing Amos of destroying community unity. She even convinced a local news outlet to run a story framing him as a greedy holdout. The article stung, twisting his quiet resolve into selfishness. At the grocery store, Amos noticed cold stares from neighbors who'd once waved hello. Sarah, furious, urged Amos to fight fire with fire. "We need to go public too," she said. "Show them who you are." They organized a press conference at the cabin, inviting reporters and residents. Amos spoke simply, holding up the deeds. "This land's been my family's for 100 years. I ain't selling it, and I ain't keeping it from you. All I want is what's mine." The reporters ate it up, especially when Sarah revealed the HOA's invalid formation. The story flipped now. Clara was the villain. Her HOA a power grab disguised as progress. Social media buzzed with "Stand with Amos," and locals began tearing down Clara's flyers. But Clara wasn't done. She rallied her loyalists for a final push, planning to pack the county hearing with supporters to sway the board. The day of the hearing arrived, a crisp morning with the lake shrouded in mist. The courthouse was overflowing. Standing room only. Clara spoke first, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "This isn't about me or Amos," she said. "It's about preserving Lake Wisteria for future generations. His claims threaten our community's future." The crowd was divided. Some clapped. Others booed. Then Amos took the stand. He didn't have Clara's polish, but his words carried weight. "My granddaddy bought this land so his family could have a home. My daddy built that dock so we could fish, laugh, live. I've shared it with y'all my whole life. Now Clara wants to take it, saying it's for the community. But what's a community without trust?" Sarah followed, dismantling Clara's case with precision. She presented the deeds, the faulty survey, the unratified HOA formation. She even called the retired judge, who testified to the Reed family's long history with the land. The county board listened intently, their faces unreadable. Then came the twist. Sarah revealed a letter from the state's land registry, uncovered just days ago. It showed that Clara had been warned about the HOA's shaky legal standing 2 years earlier, but had buried the report to push her agenda. The room gasped. Clara's face went white as Roger whispered frantically, his confidence gone. The board chair, Margaret Cole, called for order. "We'll review all evidence and rule in 3 days," she said. "But I'll say this, truth matters." And it's starting to look like some folks forgot that. Outside, the crowd spilled onto the courthouse steps, buzzing with excitement and anger. Amos's supporters surrounded him, offering hugs and handshakes. Clara slipped out a side door, her head low, Roger trailing behind. The lake, visible in the distance, seemed to watch in silence, its waters calm but deep. That night, Amos's cabin was a hub of celebration. Neighbors brought food, music played, and kids ran along the shore. But Amos was quiet, his mind on the ruling. Sarah sat beside him, her voice soft. "We've got this, Amos. The truth's on our side." He nodded, but doubt lingered. Clara had lost ground, but she was desperate. Desperate people were dangerous. And somewhere, out there, she was planning her final move. The 3 days before the county board's ruling were a pressure cooker. Lake Wisteria hummed with tension, its quiet beauty overshadowed by whispered arguments and divided loyalties. Clara Hensley, cornered but unbowed, doubled down. She and Roger Tate worked feverishly, filing motions to delay the ruling and digging for any dirt on Amos. They found nothing but leaned hard into their smear campaign, spreading rumors that Amos had once turned down a developer's offer, implying he was holding out for a bigger payout. The lies gained traction among Clara's loyalists, who plastered "Save Our Lake" signs across town, painting Amos as a traitor. Amos, meanwhile, stayed steady. He spent his days tending the dock, replacing a warped board, and raking gravel on the road as road. Neighbors stopped by, some offering support, others asking pointed questions about the rumors. "You selling out, Amos?" one asked, half joking but half serious. Amos just shook his head. "This land's my home. Ain't going nowhere." Sarah was relentless, working late into the night with her legal team. She'd uncovered more emails between Clara and a real estate developer, hinting at plans to turn Wisteria into a gated resort if the HOA could secure control. The emails weren't enough for a criminal case, but they were damning enough to sway public opinion. Sarah leaked them to the local paper, and by morning, headlines screamed, HOA president's secret deal exposed. The story hit like a tidal wave. At Linda's diner, Clara's supporters fell silent. Their Save Our Lake signs quietly disappearing. Even Ethan Carver, the young HOA board member, defected, showing up at Amos's cabin to apologize. I didn't know, he said, his face flushed. Clara told us you were the problem. I should have asked questions. Amos clapped him on the shoulder. You're a skin now. That's what matters. But Clara wasn't finished. On the eve of the ruling, she organized a last-ditch rally at the community center, framing it as a community unity event. Her speech was a masterclass in deflection, blaming Amos for division while promising a brighter future under HOA control. A few clapped, but most sat in stony silence. Her spell was breaking. The morning of the ruling, the courthouse was a circus. Reporters, residents, even a news van from Knoxville packed the lot. Inside, Margaret Cole called the hearing to order, her face stern. We've reviewed the evidence. She began. The Reed family's deeds are valid, dating back to 1920. The HOA's survey was flawed, and their formation was never ratified by the county. Mr. Reed owns his lot, the dock, and the access road. The eviction notice is void. The room erupted cheers from Amos's side, gasps from Clara's. Margaret wasn't done. Furthermore, the HOA's actions constitute harassment. We're recommending a state investigation into their practices. Clara stood, her face ashen, and stormed out, Roger scrambling after her. Amos sat quietly, his hands folded, as Sarah squeezed his shoulder. The victory was his, but it felt heavy. The lake was his. The dock was his. The road was his, but the community was fractured. Outside, the crowd swarmed Amos, offering congratulations. Old man Tucker hugged him, tears in his eyes. Your daddy'd be proud, he said. But as Amos looked out at the lake, he saw Clara's car speeding away, and he knew this wasn't the end. She'd lost the battle, but her kind of ambition didn't die easy. That night, Amos hosted another barbecue, bigger than before. The dock was packed with neighbors, their laughter echoing across the water. Kids jumped into the lake, splashing under the stars. Sarah raised a glass, toasting to truth and home. But Amos's mind was elsewhere. He'd won, but at what cost? The rumors, the broken window, the cold stares. Wisteria had changed. The next day, Clara resigned as HOA president, her letter citing personal reasons. Roger Tate left town, his reputation in tatters. The HOA itself teetered, its board scrambling to salvage credibility. Some called for its dissolution. Others wanted reform. Amos stayed out of it, letting the community decide. He'd fought for his land, not for power. But whispers of Clara's next move surfaced. She'd been seen meeting with a developer in Jasper, discussing new opportunities. Amos heard the rumors, but said nothing. He knew her type, always chasing the next big thing, never satisfied. He, on the other hand, was content. The lake was his. The dock was his. The road was his. And so was the peace of knowing he'd stood his ground. Sarah stayed a few more days, helping Amos secure his deeds with the county. You're a stubborn old goat, she teased, packing her truck. Amos grinned. Takes one to know one. As she drove off, Amos walked to the dock, the morning mist curling over the water. He sat on the edge, fishing rod in hand, and cast a line. The lake was quiet. The world was still. And for the first time in months, he felt at home. The county's ruling didn't just secure Amos Reed's land. It cracked open Lake Wistaria's fragile unity. The HOA, once a symbol of order, was now a pariah. Meetings dwindled, and board members like Tom Grayson and Linda May stepped down, citing exhaustion. Ethan Carver stayed, pushing for reform. But the damage was done. Clara Hensley's resignation left a void, and whispers of her developer meetings kept tensions high. Some feared she'd return with a new scheme. Others just wanted to move on. Amos, for his part, kept to himself. He repaired the cabin's broken window, tended the dock, and drove his old truck along the road without fanfare. But the victory was bittersweet. Neighbors who'd turned on him during Clara's smear campaign now offered sheepish nods at the diner, their guilt palpable. Amos didn't hold grudges, but he felt the scars. Wisteria wasn't the tight-knit haven it had been. Sarah, before leaving, had urged him to stay vigilant. Clara's not done, she warned. She's got money and ambition. Watch your back. Amos nodded, but his focus was on healing the community. He opened his dock to everyone, hosting fishing days and bonfires. Kids splashed in the lake, their laughter a balm for the wounds of the past months. Old-timers like Tucker helped, sharing stories of Wistaria's past to remind everyone what they'd almost lost. Yet Clara's shadow lingered. A week after the ruling, a real estate agent from Knoxville was spotted surveying the lake's edge, fueling rumors of a new development push. Locals confronted Amos at the diner, asking if he'd sell. Not in a million years, he said, his voice firm. But the question stung, a reminder of how quickly trust could erode. Ethan, now acting HOA president, called a community meeting to address the rumors. The community center was half full, a stark contrast to the packed hearings. We need to rebuild, Ethan said, his youth making him earnest rather than polished. The HOA's got to change less rules. More listening. Amos, you've shown us what's at stake. Will you help? All eyes turned to Amos, who sat in the back, his hat in his hands. He stood slowly, his presence filling the room. I ain't here to run things, he said, but I'll help if it means keeping Wisteria true to itself. No more power grabs. No more lies. The room applauded, even those who doubted him. Ethan proposed a new HOA charter, one that respected existing deeds and prioritized community input. Amos didn't speak much, but his nod carried weight. For the first time, he saw a path forward not just for his land, but for the lake. Clara, meanwhile, was licking her wounds in Jasper. She'd lost her grip on Wisteria, but she wasn't out. She met with developers, pitching a scaled-down plan for a resort on adjacent land, but without control of Amos's lot, dock, and road. Her vision was crumbling. The developers, wary of bad press, backed off. Clara's dream of a gated wisteria was fading, and with it, her influence. Amos didn't gloat. He spent his days fishing, fixing fences, and talking with neighbors. One evening, Linda May stopped by, her face lined with regret. I should have stood up sooner, she said. I believed Clara's lies. Amos offered her a beer and a seat on the porch. You're here now? He said. That's enough. The lake began to heal. Families returned to the dock. Fishermen shared their catches, and kids raced along the shore. Amos's signs, "This land is mine," still stood, but they felt less like a challenge and more like a promise. He'd fought for his home, and, in doing so, reminded Wisteria what community meant. One night, as the sun set over the lake, Amos sat with Tucker, their fishing rods dipping into the water. You think Clara's gone for good? Tucker asked. Amos shrugged. Don't matter. We've got the lake. We've got each other. Tucker nodded, and they sat in silence. the water reflecting the last rays of light. Wisteria wasn't perfect, but it was home, and Amos had made sure it would stay that way. Lake Wisteria woke to a new rhythm in the weeks after the ruling. The HOA, stripped of its overreach, limped along under Ethan's leadership. Its bylaws were written to prioritize transparency and respect for private property. Amos Reed's cabin, once a flashpoint, became a symbol of resilience. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles, fishing lures, even apologies scrawled on handwritten notes. The dock was alive again with laughter, the road busy with friendly waves. But Amos knew healing took time. The lake had seen too much division to snap back overnight. Clara Hensley was gone, at least for now. Word spread that she'd moved to Knoxville, chasing a new real estate venture. Her lakeside cabin sat empty, its windows dark, a reminder of her failed ambitions. Some whispered she'd return, but Amos didn't dwell on it. He'd faced her down once. He could do it again. His focus was on the present and the kids jumping off his dock, the fishermen sharing stories, the community knitting itself back together. One morning, Amos found a letter in his mailbox. No return address. It was from Clara, a single page of sharp, hurried handwriting. "You won this round, Amos," it read. "But Wisteria will change, with or without you. Progress doesn't stop." He read it once, then tossed it into the fire. Progress, to him, wasn't gated communities or shiny docks. It was the lake's quiet beauty, the trust of neighbors, the legacy of his family. He shared the letter with Sarah over the phone. She laughed. "She's still trying to get in your head. Let her waste her ink." Sarah had taken a piece of wisteria with her, to a promise to visit more, to fish with Amos come summer. "You're a legend now," she teased. Amos just snorted. Legends were for stories. He was just a man who'd held his ground. The community began to rebuild. Ethan's new HOA held open forums, inviting input from everyone, not just the board. Old-timers like Tucker shared wisdom, while newer residents offered ideas for small improvements, a picnic area, a community boat launch that didn't trample on history. Amos stayed out of the meetings, but listened when folks stopped by. He didn't need to lead. His fight had already shown the way. One evening, as spring crept into Tennessee, Amos hosted a bonfire. The dock glowed with lanterns, the air thick with the smell of grilled fish and pine. Neighbors crowded around, their faces lit by firelight. Kids roasted marshmallows, their giggles mixing with the crackle of flames. Linda May played her guitar, an old country tune that had everyone singing. Even Ethan joined, his youth no longer a barrier but a bridge. Amos stood at the dock's edge, watching the lake reflect the stars. Tucker sidled up, a beer in hand. "You did good, Amos," he said. "Kept this place real." Amos nodded, his eyes on the water. "Wasn't just me. Was all of us." The bonfire burned late, the community stronger for it. Amos's signs, "This land is mine," still stood, but they felt different now, less a defiance and more a truth. Wisteria wasn't just his land. It was everyone's home, a place where trust could grow again. As the fire died down, Amos sat on his porch, the lake quiet before him. He thought of his grandfather, his father, the hands that had shaped this place. He'd fought for them, for himself, for the future. And in that fight, he'd reminded Wisteria what mattered, not power or progress, but roots, truth, and each other. The lake shimmered under the moon, its surface unbroken, its heart enduring. Amos cast a line, not expecting a bite, just savoring the moment. This was his home, and it always would be.